Peter, welcome to the podcast. We're here in your studio in King's Cross. Seems like you've managed to squeeze me into quite a busy schedule that you got today.
All right, thanks for coming in. Yeah, it's definitely weird being on the other side of it today, but yeah, no, I'm looking forward to
The
it.
tables have turned. I want to speak with you about your recent conversation that you had with Oliver Yongshev, who's the co-founder of Flight Story, and it was about the concept of youthful naivety, which is this kind of beautiful idea and this beautiful concept that when we're younger, we've got this like boundless optimism that we can do anything, we can be anyone. I remember when I was probably 14, lying in bed watching motivational YouTube videos. I'm like, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to
Yeah,
do all these things. And then, and it's because we don't have this true perception of like reality. We don't understand life's complexities. And then we grow up and then we get slapped in the face by the real world. And it changes our perception and we almost get coerced into this safe and predictable and probably less satisfying lifestyle and maybe career. And it seems like you've avoided that. Could you talk me through your experience with youthful naivety?
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one because I think if we go back to like when I was much younger, I think I was always that person in class that would always ask that extra question, and everyone would be like, "Oh, like we just want to go for lunch, like what,
Shut up.
Yeah, yeah, exactly." And I've just always been very curious and I guess thought about questions that didn't fit inside the traditional norms of academia and education, for example. And I think I'm not like your textbook like career serial executor. I'm not your textbook employee that you say do this and then you'll just produce it. I think I've always been a bit like, oh no, but I see this person do this amazing career path, or I see this person living life in this way, and I want to. I'm fascinated by how they've manufactured that life for themselves, and I think that was like really the origin story of the Graduate Guide is that I knew how important getting into a good uni was at the time, and being a product of your environment. So getting to London and getting to go to UCL was great, but then once I was there, I couldn't believe that. In truth, it felt like for a lot of us, career options had boiled down to okay, earn your badges in a corporate, banking, law, consultancy kind of career path, and I thought, no, but I can see these people online going from A to B to C, but I have no idea how they're doing it. And I think when you're young, like what is your USP, right? Like what actually enabled me to even invite these guests on that I had no right really to speak to at the time. And I think what it was youthful naivety. It was the idea that I'm saying, listen, I don't know the answers. This isn't a massive podcast where you're going to get loads of PR or anything. I'm just a student that thinks who thinks you know the answers to, and I want to be as naive as possible and bring as other people on that learning journey with me. And ever since I got that first taste for how important and powerful a thing it is to live with that naivety and like that validation of it, I try and just always use that as my guiding star and motivation for everything I do. So if I ever feel like I'm becoming, a little bit too safe in what I'm doing, I revert back to okay, what's something that I'm completely naive to that I don't know the consequences of yet that I can try, I can experiment, I can fail, I can learn, I can progress. I think that's where I get a lot of fulfillment in life, and I think it's important to realize the superpower that can be. So yeah, it's something that when I spoke about with Ollie, for example, this very renowned person that everyone was like CEO of Flight Story, this massive global company. When he told a story, it's just a series of him doing things that he had no idea. He was so naive to the consequences,
Mm.
and were the most formative for his career. So I think everybody who's had success has lived with some element of youthful
Mm.
naivety.
And it's easier to look back and go, I had that naivety and it was valuable to me because it's helped me get where I am today. But that's looking back at hindsight at that success. What do you think, just in your opinion, are some of these things that stops people from doing the thing and taking the risk?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's completely not knowing what the result's going to be. Like, um, I think societally we've got a lot of cringe comes with doing anything that's off the beaten path. Like,
Mm.
you know, I think I was only really felt comfortable in starting the podcast when I knew who my friends were. I think back to times when I was less sure of myself, and I don't think I was living with as much naivety because the repercussions could have been so detrimental at the time to like my mental well-being and everything. And that's a pretty sad thing to say, that like I lived a lot of my life without there, knowing how impactful it's been for me now. But I think that's the reality. Like it makes it so important for everybody to just have their own personal life ducks in order. If you don't have that, it's very hard to live sort of with that energy that anything's possible, and you don't care what anybody else thinks, and you're not going to let anyone put you in this box. So at this point, you know, fast forward 2 years of doing something that I wasn't very good at the beginning. People now ask, "Oh, how did you do it?" But in the beginning, they didn't care, and
Mm.
in truth, I didn't want them to care. I didn't need anyone to care. Like I wanted to feel like I was progressing and being good at something, and I had the right people in my life at the time to support me in doing that. So, to answer your question, I think it really is making sure you're surrounded. Who are you letting yourself surround yourself with? Like at school, that's very difficult. But as you
Hmm.
get older, as you go to university, you have to be very conscious and intentional about who you're spending your time with. It's everything, I think. And yeah, I think the more you can live through that lens of, okay, even if it was a very small taste of naivety, not like putting all everything, put everything on red, for example. The more you can just ease yourself into it, the more comfortable you can be with that philosophy of youthful naivety, and then the more you can see how beneficial it is, right?
Mm. I think as well, society celebrates success but stigmatizes failure. And you mentioned it just now. It's like you don't have all of the answers yet. So when you're thinking about taking this risk and becoming like a young entrepreneur, you don't have all the answers, but it's like, I'm okay with the fear of failure. Is that something that you've experienced?
Yeah. Being okay with the fear of failure is not like an instantaneous, or like some people it might come more naturally to. They
Mm.
might be more unapologetically themselves. But for me, I've really had to work on that. This is why I was saying it before. It's like I would encourage people not to put everything into, okay, if this fails, if it doesn't go my way, then I'll never do it again, because life very rarely rewards you in these like overnight success stories, and social media has made people think that it's got to be that way. I think try and remove yourself and detach yourself from what you see online, and really just focus on like the feeling of progression rather than like external validation as your definition of success. Otherwise, you might always deem things as a failure, right?
Mm.
um Ultimately, it's your choice to decide what failure and success is, especially in business, right? Um, in the beginning stages, if I put the graduate guide success on how much money I made, I'm a huge, huge failure. Do you know what I mean? But for me, it was so much more than that. It was the graduate guide literally represents my career. It's a whole documentation of my journey from a history student who felt like I had no motivation in my career, and like success didn't seem attainable at that point. And everybody's watched me on this journey of like, feeling like I can do something, and feeling like I belong in a room with somebody. And I think I was the one that decided that's what success was to me. And every single week and month, that changes, but I try and be realistic about it, and not focus too much on the fear of failure.
Mm. Even though fear of failure, I think, is hardwired into our brains. I think we're, particularly from a social perspective, because when you're conforming or not conforming to the social norms where everyone around you maybe is getting the safe and predictable jobs and doing the traditional things. I'm in one of those roles myself. Like, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But as soon as you start to step outside of what others are doing, I think there's something hardwired in our brains. I think it's probably called I don't know, like tribal mentality and survival, whereby for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, for most of human history, being a tribe being part of the tribe was essential for survival. And if you did something outside of the group norms, you risk being ostracized, being put out of that group, and then that would equal death essentially back in the day. So now I think that's still hardwired into our brains a little bit, whereby we don't want to step outside of the ordinary. Is that something that you've experienced then when you started wanting to be a young entrepreneur, and maybe others around you are going down the more traditional route?
Yeah, it did. But honestly, I would argue whether you want to go down the traditional career route or not. And I say careers because careers is very important to people's general life. It's a big portion of how you spend your time. And I speak to a lot of employers now, and they all say, we just want to see how somebody's like stands out from the rest. And if you are just in the same rat race of ticking boxes, and I was ticking boxes for the majority of my career. I'm doing what everyone else is doing because it seemed like the right thing to do. And I've only seen success in my career when I've done something different. And I think a lot of people will tell you a similar thing. I think ostracizing yourself from others by just purely following your most natural self's passions and not letting anyone else dictate that's when you become an individual that other people want to invest in. They want to have you in their team. They want to follow your journey. So I could sit here and say that it's something that held me back for a while, but honestly, as soon as I got that taste of doing something different, that's when things started to change in my life. So I think I would encourage people to just try and see what doing something looks like and how it can impact their life.
And I suppose there's probably lots of barriers then to doing the thing and pushing forward, maybe something that you're passionate about. To what extent are you aware of those things that are holding you back? And were you then aware that you started to overcome them? Is that something that was conscious?
So I think the first thing to answer this question is to contextualize privilege, because, and I don't just mean that in a traditional means. I think privilege comes in a lot of different ways. Like, for example, I've got a family that is very supportive of me. I have the ability to move home if all else failed. Like, trying to think about and not just in a monetary means, your own privilege, and pulling that all into one big moment where so for the longest time I was a student, and the graduate guide's always been something on the side for me. Even though, yes, I've been doing something different, I've always been in full-time employment or as being a student. Like, it's always been that thing on the side. And it's only 3 months ago that I actually took the risk of going full-time on it and saying, this is me, this is what I'm going to try and build a career in. So I don't think you have to, just in one spur of like courageousness, put all your efforts into doing something risk-taking. I think there is an element of how can you test and validate that people actually want your solution, or that this alternative path that you're dreaming up could have legs before you actually go fully into it. And I think now I am reaping the benefits of that, but it's not an easy step to make, and I think everybody has to try and work out their own comfortability with pulling together privilege and then just like actually taking that leap to really just give it a go and know if all else fails, you've got something to come back to, right?
Even if there's a perception that it's failed, have you actually failed, or have you just found out what doesn't work this time? And can you then learn from that? So I think it's more about what's the definition of success from that perspective. When I was kind of pondering on this last night, and it reflects to your point
Sounds
around
like you're doing
taking
a lot of pondering last night.
A lot of pondering in my preparation last night. The kind of quote there you said around just you've got to take the leap at some point. Obviously for you it was a bit of a build up, and you're saying don't take a huge risk, but like de-risk it by building up into something, maybe do it part-time, but eventually you do have to take that leap. And it almost comes down to having like a fuck it mentality. Like at some point you need to give yourself the permission slip to go fuck it, regardless of the risks. I'm going to own my own story here. I'm going to take action.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why the art of not giving a fuck is becoming a more and more coined term. I think
That's a good book.
Yeah, it's great, and I think it's great because now more than ever, like it feels like a lot of people are getting stuck in a life of monotony while you're seeing online like these people having incredibly stimulating lives, whether that be real or not. And I think like the ability to harness and leverage the modernity of life and social media and everything is your ability to not give a fuck about what's on there and use it in the way that you actually want to, right? Like, I mean, I grew up in a generation where social media it wasn't what it is now, but it was everybody was on it, and it did dictate an annoying amount of my life again. And I think I've really enjoyed getting older and getting my priorities straight. When it comes to not giving a fuck about what others think, like on LinkedIn, for example, I first went on there and I was like, this is never going to be a platform for me. There's emojis flying everywhere. There's successful people congratulating other successful people, and as a student, I'm like, where do I fit into all this?
Yeah,
And
I felt the same when I first went on LinkedIn.
yeah,
I was like,
because
what the fuck is this? Just rich people and successful people talking about
yeah,
themselves.
yeah, and a lot of people could still get that perception of it, but at the end of the day, it's you have a choice in how you use it, and there's a lot of really powerful elements to LinkedIn, but the only time that I actually started reaping those benefits is when I stopped giving a fuck about the cringe that comes with it, whether that's being a user or being someone that posted, and actually just saying like, okay, again, there was an element of in the beginning stages, I was just saying, this person said this, don't take it from me. I'm just this guy who did a podcast with this person. So I was, de-risking or like trying to minimize that cringe that I felt. But the more and more success I've had on the platform and the more and more authenticity I've shown, it does
the more you showed your own opinion.
Yeah, it comes down to me just not giving a fuck anymore. And I there's a common theme in this conversation. It's very easy to sit here and say like, okay, this is ultimately the end goal is to not give a fuck, and that will benefit you. But there are loads of series of steps of becoming comfortable with that feeling that you have to go through and finding your own way to go through it. And some are going to do it quicker than others, some are going to do it slower. But knowing that is the end goal you want to get to and having an idea of what those steps you could take could be, I think is a really important lens to live your life through.
How do you think people can identify what some of those steps would be for them as individuals?
I mean, first of all, you have to think like, and this is something with the graduate guide I've learned over time, is that not everybody is meant to have this entrepreneur fancy lifestyle where it's not for some people are just really happy with doing a job that they get paid for, doing it very well, and going home and enjoying their life with their close-knit community, and that's how they want to live their life. So I'm not going to, just because I'm doing it and I'm sort of born more inclined to be a founder or do something for myself, like it's very important for me to be aware that
it's not for everyone.
It's not, yeah. I think careers is all about the allocation of the right person into the right role for them. It's not about what you see on social media a lot. It's like, how do you find your dream career? It's about how do you find out who you are and allocate that to the right role or industry. So, answering your question, I think once you've found out what it is you wanna become and do, those steps become somewhat more clear, and then I think it's about actually thinking, okay, let's strip away the hard skills that you need for a job or to be a certain type of founder, and actually think about where you're most in your own element in day-to-day life. And for me, that happens to be a podcast at the time, but for everyone they'll be different. It's just how can you just do something that other people aren't with your own twist on it, and I think that's really what will formulate the steps, right?
And I think even before that, it's particularly maybe in your early to mid and even late 20s, I think do as many things as possible, like get as much exposure to everything, to not just define the thing that you do want to do and that you're passionate about, but to also work out what you don't want to do. And I think there is a lot of pressure in society on finding your passion and finding your career and finding like what's good for you. But I think your 20s particularly is more about finding what you don't want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think I spent so much time trying to lean into opportunities just to see, is this for me or is this not for me? And I'd say most of the time I'm like, no, I've tried that and it's not for me. But like now I can tick that box off, and that's probably then going to push me in the direction of something that I do want to do in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if I wasn't building the graduate guide, I wouldn't know what I'd be doing. I mean, ultimately, if you looked at my CV or LinkedIn, you'd see somebody that, they graduated from UCL with a 2-1 in history, and then he went into this, he built and exited from a water filter company, then he went to go work as head of events for a blockchain education company, and then he, was like, oh, the graduate guide's always been growing, I'm going to give this a go. Like, you can make it all seem very easy and simple, but the reality is it's just not that at all. Like, every single one of them is not been right for some reason, or every single step to do something has been very difficult for one reason or another. UCL history degree didn't give me what I thought it might. Okay, so then I thought, back against the wall moment, what can I do? Through the podcast, I tried building a water filter company which has gone on to achieve a lot of success since I've moved on from it. But I'm not
since you left.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I'm not meant to be a direct consumer founder. So, I learned that very early on. But what an amazing thing to learn! I probably won't do that again, or at least not till I'm in a better place to do it. And then I was like, okay, I love events. I love going to festivals. I got this amazing opportunity to put on hackathons in the US and the UK. And it was in the Web3 industry. I'm not passionate about Web3 as it turns out, but I love events and I got pretty good at putting them on. Okay, can I turn the graduate guide into a business with everything that I've learned? Who knows? But I'm going to give it a go. And that's where I sit right now. Like, and I
that's
think
the youthful naivety as well. It's like, fuck it. Why don't I give that a go?
It is, but and it's also why the graduate guide exists. It's that every single person who comes on this, like they can have so much success and appear like so inaccessible to emulate a career like theirs, but all their decisions, everything that's happened to them, has never been simple. In their mind, it's been so difficult, and there's been so many things to overcome, but you don't see them online. So we're about telling these authentic stories and demystifying the route to emulate somebody's success. That's why it exists. Everybody should feel heard in a career sense. And yeah, I couldn't think of a better thing to be doing at 23 right now. Whether it's going to be the biggest profitable business in the world, I don't know. You can't predict that, but I do know how it makes me feel. So I'm riding with that feeling.
Yeah, and it led you to be sat in a room with me today. Like, how great is that?
The best. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because you have evidence that you need to just do some shit to find out what it is that you're passionate about, and maybe start to identify indicators where you're like, okay, that's an indicator that I'm not passionate about Web3. Oh, this is an indicator that I'm interested in events. And then you can start to put those puzzle pieces together. I think what's interesting from that, though, is I think often people are looking for, oh, I need to be super, super motivated, or it's not right for me. Whereas I'm of the opinion that motivation follows action. Like, it's very, very rare that you're instantly motivated to do one particular thing, having not actually started doing that thing. You almost need to do the thing first, take action, and the motivation will follow.
Yeah.
Or the motivation doesn't follow and you realize that's not for you. And I think too many people are actually waiting for the motivation to happen before actually taking action, building momentum, and then allowing the motivation to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the classic chicken and the egg, story and debate is. And I think it's funny with podcasts. Like, you often find yourself saying like what sounds like very generic advice, or like discussing themes that seem obvious, but fundamentally what you just said there, like, that is what it is. You're never gonna know if you're motivated by something unless you go ahead and do it, right? And I think the importance of having conversations like these, and it doesn't have to be on camera on a podcast, but actually talking about these topics is that you need context and you need somebody that you trust the judgment of, and you think their
Mm,
opinion matters to say these quotes. Like every single quote that you've seen online that you dismiss as cringy or not relatable, it once had wisdom in it, and that's something that I've been learning, right?
yeah.
And it's a crazy thing that social media's done. It's a load of people saying something that they don't actually know or what it means, and it doesn't mean anything to them. They just think it will get clicks and help with their vanity metrics. Like I think this is why conversation and learning through conversation rather than just being told something is so important. Yeah, it does just come down to trying things and then reflecting on others and then working out whether that is enough motivation to go ahead and do it for the rest of your life.
Mm. Chris Williamson said on this podcast recently that every single piece of self-development advice has already been posted on Instagram. Like every answer that you need already exists. And the reason that people find them so cringy are these kind of like simple things of like, just do it, or like fuck it mentality, or insert like bro science, cringy self-development posts that you see on Instagram. The reason that they are so popular and they're used so much is because they are so founded in truth, but they look cringy until they become contextually relevant to you. And I think that's why people will start to share that quote. And you're like, oh, fucking, I've seen that quote 100 times. But until it becomes contextual and relevant to you, you're just like, oh, it's just that. But it's those simple ones that are often the most truthful. It's just waiting for it to be relevant.
Yeah, and I think like, it's also when you receive that information as well, right? Like I've heard things in the past and then somebody's relayed it to me in their own voice and their own words at a time that I needed it most. Like for example, one that I speak about quite often when somebody asks me what was the favorite guest you had on the podcast. Like, I find that a very difficult question to answer.
Who is your favorite guest?
Okay, yeah, I'm not answering that directly, but one of my favorite pieces of advice was in my maybe 13th episode, 20th episode, at a time that at university I thought entrepreneurialism was really inaccessible to young people. I found myself going through accelerators and doing all the things that students are meant to do and just constantly ideating and validating and iterating, but never actually doing anything or taking any learnings from it. And people would say, being a founder, you've got to sacrifice your whole life. You've got to hate yourself for 10 years before you get anywhere. And I was like, this all sounds a bit, I don't know if I want to do this, right? I don't know, maybe this isn't me. And I think Sam Horby, the founder of Old Sam, he said to me, he's like, yeah, entrepreneurship is, being an entrepreneur is all these things. Like, it is hard. There are bad days, everything. But, what is the point in life if you are not happy and enjoying the journey of doing it? Like, really, what is the point in doing it? And I think I've heard that kind of a version of that so many times, but at that time when I really needed to hear from somebody that was successful as a founder,
became relevant,
and I was like, okay, maybe doing something for my own at this stage in life is something worth pursuing. Maybe there is a way I can find an enjoyable life in trying to do something that nobody else is doing, and dismiss all the manic depressive things that come with being a founder. And yeah, so I think advice is you should really try and seek it when you need it most, right?
You mentioned sacrifices just now, that there's a perception that founders, entrepreneurs need to make sacrifices. What sacrifices have you had to make?
I mean, honestly, like, I'd hate to sit here and be like, I've had to make all these sacrifices and try and paint my story as against all odds, because it isn't that. But one thing I would say is that, I was fortunate enough, like, and it's why we've done so much work with Zero Gravity, that my dad massively benefited from social mobility back in a time where it was placed as more important by government policies, etc. And he always instills the need in us to build on the privilege that he's given us, like do something exceptional with the time you're being afforded. I spent a lot of my life with people who come from privilege but had no sense of what they could do with it. They had no desire to build or do anything, and I think like actually some element of sacrifice or getting over something was taking myself away from people that didn't want to do anything, right? Like, it's not easy to go from a group of unmotivated people who don't really want to do anything and then thrust yourself in the deep end at like somewhere like UCL, which I really felt like I didn't belong, and try and compete on their level, and compete with their levels of motivation. And I think for me, I've always, latched onto that feeling of like spending time with people that are always better than me, or further ahead than me. That's what I do every day with a podcast. And I think like doing that to yourself day in, day out, that probably is quite a big sacrifice or like quite a big commitment to make, right? Like,
What, to leave people behind, potentially?
well, I mean,
to move towards a new group that will nurture and support the career that you want or the future that you want?
well, I think it's for example, you could be very good at one sport and get very comfortable every day just going to play that sport, but then never try another because of the fear of looking bad, or not being the best in that room. And I think it's more comfortable to feel good at something. Everyone enjoys being good at something, but I feel like every day I'm sacrificing comfortability for trying to actually do something greater than what I was given. Trying to utilize the time and the support that I've been given in this journey to every single day put myself out of my comfort zone in a different way. I think it's really important that people just always try and strive to do something that's slightly more uncomfortable and risk taking than the scenario that they're living in. So, yeah, for me, the reason why I'm asking this question this way is that it's been pretty easy in a lot of ways in my life, but I'm not happy with accepting that, and I think like too many people do.
I think you're pushing yourself not to be in comfort, and I feel like when you're old and grey or bold like me, you'll look back and you're not going to regret pushing yourself, but you probably will look back and regret a life where you stayed comfortable, perhaps. I'm sure not everyone's like that, but I can see that with you. If people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
I mean, my life is basically documented on LinkedIn at this point. So, yeah, and I'm not the Instagram, TikTok guy, but my producer behind the camera, we're live on all socials now, I think. Yeah, and yeah, so yeah, follow my journey and the Graduate Guide's journey on LinkedIn.
I think I'm personally excited to see your story as well, because I think that you're someone that genuinely wants to see others flourish. I think obviously you've got your own ambitions and goals as an individual, but you're very much more about supporting others as well. So I'm personally excited to watch your kind of growth and the growth of the Graduate Guide and the amazing team that you've got in the future as well. Thank you for coming on.
I appreciate that, mate. Thanks for having me on.